Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another quick album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Earl Sweatshirt and the Alchemist record, Voir Dire. Before I talk about Earl and the Alchemist, let me talk about an album from last year. I promise there's a reason for this. Despite initially coming across like a pretty big deal for fans of classic alternative hip-hop, Black Star's 2022 comeback album, No Fear of Time, it just didn't make any wave at all. In fact, I would argue that by now it's almost completely forgotten outside of those that were absolutely in love with it, like all three people. And the reason for that was almost solely because of the fact that it had one of the worst album rollouts in any recent memory, to be totally honest. I mean, it was just randomly dropped on some podcasting service that nobody used and was never put on streaming services that were actually accessible to your everyday music fan, leaving it ultimately in the dust and leaving Black Star's big comeback album to be just absolutely nothing, sort of a star collapsing in on itself, if you will. Now, here's where the segue part comes in. While Voir Dire doesn't necessarily have as bad of an album rollout in that I don't think this record will be totally forgotten 3 months from now like No Fear of Time was, there's no denying that the rollout for this record has been not good, to say the very least, confusing at best. I mean, the somewhat NFT-infused rollout that's going on here with some random service that no one's used, music streaming service, and that's the exclusive place it's released on, and I think there's something related to crypto in there. I don't really know, man. What I do know is that this record, despite not being mainstream per se, definitely had a huge amount of hype behind it, as Earl is easily one of the biggest alternative rappers on the planet right now, just as The Alchemist is one of the biggest alternative producers on the planet right now. And as soon as people realized how this album was getting released, it seemed like nobody cared. Now, the point that I'm trying to make in the end. While that Black Star album was very mediocre in the first place and not worth your time, it was barely worth pirating, if I'm being totally honest, which is not something I did, to clarify. But I do think that this Earl and Alchemist album, besides the fact that it's easier to access and that you probably won't have to pirate it, it's worth going out of your way to find. Even if it's not the greatest thing in the world, it's a collaboration between two titans that works out just as well as you would expect it to. Earl is, as always, infinitely enigmatic, if that can even begin to describe the man. I mean, his personality on this record is somewhere in between the best cryptic poet you've ever heard and some guy that's been locked up in his bedroom for 2 weeks without showering, questioning what the point of his life is. And that's always been something that has been a characteristic of Earl Sweatshirt as a public figure, and that is not something that has changed here. Voir Dire sees him go smoothly from verse to verse and track to track with an awkward presence that is simultaneously endearing and somewhat imposing, especially when you combine that with his surrealism lyricism that's found on the vast majority of this record that, although not particularly shocking to your dedicated Earl fan, is still definitely something that can be off-putting to those that aren't particularly used to it. It just makes for a performance that is strange, hard to describe, a big reason why I didn't give this a full review, so on and so forth, but really kind of great all the same. Meanwhile, The Alchemist has cooked up some great beats once again. It's not necessarily something that strays from the typical sounds and formulas that people have really come to expect from him by now, but at the same time, hey, that formula's good, so why break it? They do fit Earl perfectly, of course, dark rapper mixed with dark beats, but at the same time, they also stand on their own as strong instrumentals. I mean, there is a sort of cold yet human life to the entirety of the instrumental quality of this record that I think is solely something that The Alchemist could pull off. I don't necessarily know if there's another producer in the entirety of the music industry right now that can create something as mechanical yet still real as The Alchemist can on albums like these. And again, it's something that you've definitely heard from the guy's production style, if you've heard literally anything else by him ever, in terms of collaborations at least, but still, it's something that suits Earl perfectly. Again, dark presence, coming together to make one giant dark presence, and it's really good. The sampling choices from The Alchemist are also very intriguing as well. They come from a variety of different, probably highly obscure places, considering some of them I couldn't even find. And more importantly than that, they add this sense of melancholia and even slight bittersweet nostalgia to an extent that certainly helps break up the deadpan flow that Earl tends to have the vast majority of the time. Not to say that that's a bad quality about him as a rapper, but it also is something that kind of forces any producers collabing with him to do something to sort of break that up a bit, and that's exactly what The Alchemist does. As far as criticisms go, they tend to be a bit minor, and really the only extent that they go out to is just there isn't quite enough here. I mean, the album barely cracks 25 minutes. It's a brief record, and that brevity is something that damages it a bit. I mean, I kind of want more from this album, and I want it to expand upon itself beyond one single dimly lit sound, and that's just not something that it really can do when it doesn't even have half an hour to do its thing and to evolve any. I'm not saying that the sound is bad, it's just very singular, and it's kind of something that prevents me from wanting to revisit the album more and more and more in the same way that I want to other Earl projects or even other Alchemist projects. Nonetheless, there is enough excellence from both ends of the collaboration here to prove that Earl Sweatshirt and The Alchemist are indeed a good match. Not that that really comes to the surprise of anybody, but still, two idiosyncratic guys come together and make idiosyncratic music. Who would have thought? I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this quick album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.